My daughter-in-law looked at the quilt I'd brought and actually laughed. Not a polite, uncomfortable laugh. A real one. The kind that made the people standing nearby turn their heads. She held it up with 2 fingers like it was something she'd found at the back of a thrift store and said, "Mom, is this from your sewing group?" My son didn't put down his drink. He just said, "We talked about this. The gift table is for actual gifts." 53 people at that baby shower heard that. 53 people watched me stand there in my good cardigan while my own son told me I'd brought the wrong thing to welcome his first child into the world. I folded the quilt, put it back in the bag, and walked to my car. The drive home to Sudbury took 40 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. When I got inside, I made myself a cup of tea, sat down at the kitchen table, and called my financial advisor. "Sandra," I said, "I need to start the restructuring. Everything we talked about last year." She went quiet for a moment. "Helen, are you sure you want to do this now?" "Yes. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Quick question before we go further. Has someone you loved ever made you feel small for something you gave them from your whole heart? Leave me a comment. I read every single one. And subscribe if you want to hear what happened when my son found out that the woman who sews quilts also owns the building his company leases office space in. Some details in this story have been adjusted for privacy, but the lesson is entirely real. Now, let me take you back to where this actually started. My son, whose name I'll call by his relationship to me because that's what matters here. My son had moved to Toronto 7 years ago with his wife, Pauline. They had a condo near St. Lead. Lawrence Market, the kind of place with exposed brick and a rooftop terrace and a monthly maintenance fee that would cover my grocery bill for 4 months. He worked in commercial real estate development. Good salary, impressive job title. The kind of career that made people at dinner parties ask follow-up questions. His wife came from a family in Oakville. Her father was a retired orthodontist. Her mother sat on 2 charitable boards and organized a fundraiser every spring that got written up in the local paper. From the day my son brought her home to meet me, she treated me the way you treat a distant relative you're obligated to invite to things but hope won't stay long. I worked at the front desk of a physiotherapy clinic in Sudbury. Had for 19 years. I handled bookings, insurance billing, patient intake, the phone that never stopped ringing. I wore the same 3 cardigans in rotation and brought my lunch in a container I'd had since 2009. My hands were always dry from the hand sanitizer. My reading glasses were the cheap ones from Shoppers Drug Mart. That's what my son saw when he looked at me. A 64-year-old woman behind a reception desk who sewed quilts in her spare time and drove a 9-year-old Civic. What he did not see was what I had been doing since 1994. I drove back to Sudbury that afternoon and sat in the house I'd lived in since my son was 7 years old. A 3-bedroom on a quiet street near Ramsey Lake. Nothing fancy, but mine. Paid off in 2011. From the top shelf of the hall closet, behind the extra blankets, I pulled out the fireproof box I'd had for 20 years. Inside were the documents I had never shown anyone except my accountant and my lawyer. 22 property files. Commercial and residential. 6 in Sudbury. 5 in North Bay. 4 in Sault Ste. Marie. 3 in Timmins. 2 in Barrie. 1 in Toronto's East End, a mixed-use building on Kingston Road that I'd purchased through a numbered company in 2017. Total appraised value as of the previous spring, just under $19 million. It started the year my marriage ended. My ex-husband left in 1993, the week before Christmas, when my son was 4 years old. He left me with the house, the car, a line of credit I hadn't known he'd maxed out, and a child who still believed in Santa Claus. I went back to work full-time. I picked up evening shifts at a drugstore on weekends. I stopped buying anything I didn't need. Every dollar that wasn't keeping the lights on or putting food on the table went into a savings account I didn't touch. In 1996, the duplex next door to a colleague of mine went into foreclosure. She mentioned it to me without expecting anything. I asked her what they were asking. She told me. I called the bank the next morning, $43,000. I had $41,000 saved. I borrowed $2,000 from my mother, bought the duplex, and spent 8 weekends painting and patching it myself. I found tenants through the bulletin board at the grocery store. 2 nurses from Health Sciences North. They stayed 4 years. The rent from that duplex bought the next one, and the one after that. Every 18 months, roughly, I bought something. I learned to read an MPAC assessment. I learned to talk to contractors without getting taken. I learned what cap rate meant, what a vendor take-back mortgage was, what it cost to replace a roof versus patch one. I learned all of it while answering phones and processing insurance claims and making sure the physiotherapists had their schedules sorted by 8 in the morning. I never told my son. I wanted him to grow up understanding that showing up mattered, that the person who did their job without complaint and paid their bills on time and kept their word had something that couldn't be bought. I thought if he didn't know about the money, he would love me for who I actually was. Instead, he grew up ashamed of what I did for a living. In high school, he stopped having friends over. At his university graduation, he introduced me to his professors as my mother. She works in healthcare administration, which was technically true and strategically vague. When he married Pauline, I was seated at a table near the kitchen with his father's cousin and a college friend of hers from out of province. Not the family table. Not near the family table. Near the kitchen. I pulled out the last document from the box. A lease agreement. The company my son worked for, a mid-sized development firm, had leased office space in a commercial building on Kingston Road in Toronto's East End since 2019. The building was owned by a numbered company called 2847691 Ontario Inc. I was the sole shareholder. My son had worked out of my building for 5 years and had no idea. His parking spot was mine. The lobby he walked through every morning was mine. The boardroom where he'd pitched projects and signed contracts was mine. I closed the box and called Sandra. Sandra had been my financial advisor for 11 years. She knew every property, every trust, every account. She had a way of listening that made you feel like she'd heard worse and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Helen," she said, when I told her about the baby shower. "Okay. What do you want to do?" "I want to have everything reviewed, the Toronto building, especially. I want to know exactly what my options are." She was quiet for a moment. "This is about more than the building, isn't it?" "It's about more than the building, isn't it? It's about making sure I understand what I own before I decide what to do with it. Give me a week." 4 days later, Sandra called me back. She had run the numbers and then called a colleague. "Helen, there's something you need to know about the building. The development firm your son works for, they've been in negotiations to purchase the property from the numbered company for the past 8 months. His firm doesn't know who the owner is. His firm has no idea that the person they've been trying to buy the building from is the woman who made the quilt they got laughed at." I sat down. Sandra kept going. "Their offer is $3.2 million. The property is worth approximately $2.8 on the current market. They're motivated buyers. But here's the part I want you to hear clearly. If this deal goes through under the current structure, your son will receive a substantial commission. He's listed as the lead on this acquisition. His bonus alone would be close to $80,000. He's been pushing this deal for months internally." I thought about the baby shower. The quilts I had started in January, 7 months before the due date, made from fabric I'd ordered from a shop in Halifax because I'd seen a photo of it and thought the colors were right. 63 hours of work. I had kept track because I always kept track of things. "He's been trying to buy my building," I said. "He's been trying to buy your building," Sandra confirmed. "And he doesn't know it's yours." I sat in my kitchen in Sudbury for a long time after that call. The lake was visible from my back window when the leaves were down. It wasn't a dramatic view, just a corner of silver water through the bare birches, but I'd looked at it every winter morning for over 20 years, and it had never failed to steady me. I looked at it now. I called Deborah. Deborah was my lawyer. She had a small firm in Sudbury and she knew every company, every trust, every numbered corporation I owned. She was practical in the way that people who grew up in Northern Ontario tend to be practical, which is to say, she solved problems without a lot of ceremony. When I explained a situation, she asked only one question. "What outcome do you want?" I said, "I want my son to know who his mother is before he finds out from a transaction report. I want him to hear it from me." She said, "Then we need to arrange a meeting. And we need to do it before his firm's lawyers request the ownership disclosure documents, which, by my estimate, they'll do in the next 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I said. She said, "I'd give yourself 2. My son called 3 times that week. The first message was cheerful, almost performative. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Pauline's doing great. We had the ultrasound on Thursday. Everything looks good." The second was shorter. "Mom, you haven't called back." The third one I listened to twice. It was late, his voice was lower. "Something's going on at work. There's a situation with this acquisition I'd been working on, and I can't figure out why the numbered company keeps stalling. I don't know. I just thought maybe talking it through with you might help. Call me back when you get a chance." I played that one twice. He wanted my advice. He'd called me for advice, the same way he used to when he was 19 and couldn't figure out why his first car kept stalling, before Pauline's family convinced him that the opinions of a receptionist from Sudbury weren't particularly worth seeking out. I almost called back. Almost. Then I remembered standing in the parking lot of the banquet hall in Oakville, putting a 63-hour quilt back into a gift bag, and I went to bed. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon in late October, I drove to Toronto. My son and Pauline had a second property by then, a house in Leslieville they'd bought the year before. They were splitting their time between the condo and the house. I'd been to the house once for a brief visit at Christmas when Pauline had served me decaf from a pod machine and asked no questions about my drive. I parked on the street and sat for a moment. The maple out front had gone red, and most of the leaves were down on the sidewalk. The neighborhood was nice. Quiet streets, good bones on the houses, the kind of area that had changed a lot in 10 years and would keep changing. I rang the bell. My son answered in a flannel shirt and jeans. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been working on something that wasn't going the way he expected. "Mom," he said. I could hear the surprise in it, and underneath the surprise, something else. Relief, maybe. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He stepped back. "Are you okay? Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine. I just need to talk to both of you." Pauline appeared from the kitchen. She was wearing what I'd come to think of as her company outfit, the combination she put on when she wanted to project a certain version of herself. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, patient and slightly braced. "Dorothy, this is unexpected. We should sit down." We sat in the living room. My son had his phone face down on the coffee table, which I recognized as the gesture of a man who was expecting something he didn't understand. Pauline had her hands in her lap. "I want to tell you some things," I said. "I need you both to listen until I finish." My son nodded. "You're worrying me, Mom." I opened my bag and set 2 folders on the coffee table. "The first folder," I said, "is a summary of a real estate portfolio I've been building since 1996. 22 properties across Northern Ontario and 1 in Toronto. Total current value just under $19 million. I started with a duplex in Sudbury that went into foreclosure. I've been buying and managing properties ever since. None of this was inherited. All of it was built on a receptionist salary and 29 years of not spending money I didn't have to spend." My son stared at me. Pauline's hand moved to her collarbone. "That's not possible," she said. "I bought my first property the year you were born," I told my son. "I never told you because I wanted to see who you would become when you thought your mother had nothing." He hadn't touched his coffee. He was looking at me like someone trying to recalibrate a piece of equipment that had given an unexpected reading. "Mom, why wouldn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted your respect before I had your attention." "Those are different things. And I sat behind a pillar at your wedding, so I got my answer." His face changed. The second folder, I said, is about a building on Kingston Road in Toronto's East End. Commercial mixed use. Purchased 2017 through a numbered company. Your firm has been in active negotiations to acquire that building for the past 8 months. You are the lead on that file. I am the sole shareholder of the numbered company you've been trying to buy from. The room went very quiet. My son said nothing for a long time. I watched him put it together. I watched him go back through the months of calls to his broker, the stalled negotiations, the ownership disclosure requests that had been delayed by what his firm's lawyers had chalked up to a cautious seller. You own the building, he said. I've owned it since 2017. Pauline stood up. She walked to the window. Her back was to us, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was doing calculations, I knew. She was very good at calculations. My son looked at her back and then looked at me. Does your firm know? Does anyone at your office know that you're the seller? No one knows. My accountant knows. My lawyer knows. You're the third person I've told. So all this time, he said slowly. All this time, he said slowly? All this time when I called you, when you didn't call back, you were deciding. I was giving you enough time to decide first about who you wanted to be, without knowing. He looked at the folder. He opened it. He looked at the lease agreements, the property summaries, the numbered company filings. He turned to the page where his firm's name appeared as the prospective buyer. He read it twice. The quilt, he said quietly. I waited. He closed his eyes. Mum, the way she said that at the shower. The way I didn't say anything. You let her. He didn't argue. I gave him that, at least. He didn't try to explain it or minimize it. He sat with it. Pauline turned around from the window. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear something underneath it, something she was working to keep, even. So what do you want? What is this? Some kind of ultimatum? It's not an ultimatum, I said. It's information. What you do with information is your choice. It always has been. The building, she said. The acquisition. You could have let it go through. My son would have made his commission. The deal would have closed and you would have gotten your price. No one would have known. I know, I said. So why? Because I didn't want the first honest conversation I'd had with my son in 4 years to happen in a notary's office when he saw my name on the disclosure documents. She looked at me for a long time. Then she sat down. My son asked me to stay for dinner. I did. Pauline was quiet through most of it, which was its own kind of honesty. She wasn't cold, exactly. She was recalibrating, the same way my son was. There's something that happens to people when they realize they've been operating on wrong information for a very long time. It doesn't look like guilt at first. It looks like fatigue. After dinner, when Pauline had gone upstairs, my son and I sat at the kitchen table. He made tea. He put a mug in front of me without asking how I took it, because he still remembered from 30 years of watching me make it the same way. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. When I called last week about the acquisition, I said I wanted your advice. I know. You already knew it was your building. Yes. And you still didn't call back. He wasn't angry. He was trying to understand. I'd raised someone who, at his core, was still trying to understand rather than react. And that, despite everything, was something. I needed you to call me because you wanted to talk to your mother, I said. Not because you needed help with a deal. He looked at his hands. He nodded. He didn't say anything for a while. I have to tell you something, he said finally. Pauline's family, her parents, they've always, and I know this isn't an excuse, but they've always made it clear that where I came from was that it was something to manage, that my background was something to move past, and I let that become how I saw it too. I stopped seeing you clearly. I stopped seeing what you'd actually built. I just saw the cardigan and the Civic, and the reception desk, and I was embarrassed. For no reason that had anything to do with you. For every reason that had nothing to do with me, I said. He wiped his face. He was crying in the quiet way that men who have been raised not to cry tend to cry, trying not to make it visible. What do I do now? You call your broker on Monday. You disclose the ownership conflict. Your firm will likely reassign the file. You might lose the commission. I want you to be prepared for that. He nodded. And after that, I said, I'm putting the Kingston Road building into a trust. The trust will offer your firm a right of first refusal at fair market value. Whatever they decide to do with that is between them and their lawyers. But I want there to be no version of this where your career benefited from something I did without you knowing. He looked up. You've been building things for 30 years, I said, and I want you to build your career the same way. On the actual work, not on my foundations without knowing. Mum! He stopped. How are you so calm? I've had 30 years of practice, I said. You get calm when you stop waiting for people to see what you're worth and start building things that are worth seeing. I drove back to Sudbury the next morning. It was a Friday, early, and the highway was mostly empty. The trees along the 400 had gone bare, and the sky was that particular shade of northern October gray that I had always loved, because it looked like the beginning of something rather than the end. Still with me? Leave a comment that says, still here so I know. And I want to ask you something. In my position, would you have told him sooner, or would you have waited? Leave me. Told him or waited. I want to see where you land. Some of what follows has been adjusted for privacy, but the core of it is exactly what happened. The acquisition file was reassigned within 10 days. My son disclosed the conflict of interest to his firm's partners. He lost the commission. He didn't call me to complain about it. He called me to tell me it was done and that he wanted to have me over for dinner the following weekend. Paulin and I did not become close friends. That would be the easy version, and this is not the easy version. What we became was honest with each other in a way we hadn't been before. She told me, the first time we were alone after that Thursday in October, that her parents had spent her entire childhood making her feel that the right kind of people were the ones who already had money and that everyone else was either aspiring or irrelevant. She said she had repeated that to herself for so long that she'd stopped noticing it was a choice. I told her that I understood how that happened and that I didn't hold it against her, which was true. I held it against myself, a little, for not naming it sooner. But I didn't tell her that. My granddaughter was born on a Tuesday in December, 7 pounds 4 ounces. They named her after my mother, which my son had suggested and Pauline had agreed to, and I did not make a thing of it, but I kept that agreement close. I was in the room, not in the waiting area, not at home waiting for a text. In the room, the way I had wanted to be, the way I had not expected to be allowed to be. When they handed her to me, I sat in the chair by the window and held her and looked at the shape of her face and thought about the duplex on Elm Street in Sudbury, and the night in 1996 when I had sat at my kitchen table and worked out whether I could afford it, and decided that I could, and decided that I would, and that everything that came after had come from that one decision made by a recently divorced woman with $400 in her checking account and a 4-year-old asleep down the hall. My son was standing near the door, watching me hold her. He had the look that new fathers get, exhausted and astonished in equal parts. "Mum," he said. I looked up. "Thank you for October. For all of it. For not letting me get away with it." I looked back at his daughter. "You didn't need saving," I said. "You needed waking up. There's a difference. The quilt I made is on the change table in the nursery. Pauline put it there herself, without me asking. 63 hours of work in teal and cream, and a pale yellow that I'd thought might be right for a child who didn't yet know who they were going to be. It was not spare change. It was not a throwaway gift from a woman behind a reception desk. It was the first thing I had given her before she was born, and it would still be there long after she was old enough to ask about the woman who made it. And I intend to be around long enough to answer. I still think about that drive home from Oakville. 40 minutes on the 400, no radio, just the highway and the dark and the quilt folded on the back seat, like something that had been judged and found wanting. 63 hours of work, teal and cream and a pale yellow I'd chosen because I thought it would suit a child who didn't yet know who they were going to be. And it had taken less than 10 seconds for someone to decide it wasn't worth the table space. What I know now, and what I maybe always knew but hadn't said plainly to myself, is that the way people treat what you give them tells you exactly what they think you're worth. Not the gift, you. Pauline didn't laugh at a quilt. She laughed at the woman who made it because she had decided years earlier that that woman's time, hands, and judgment didn't count for much. My son let it happen because he had been slowly convinced, over years of Sunday dinners in Oakville, that the right response to his mother was quiet management, rather than honest presence. That's not a single moment of cruelty. That's a habit. And habits have a logic to them. What you allow to continue, continues. What you fail to correct becomes the shape of the relationship. I had let things slide for years because I told myself it would get better, because I didn't want to make a scene, because I thought maybe I was being too sensitive about the pillar at the wedding and the decaf in the chipped mug and the way Pauline said, healthcare administration with a particular kind of pause. But none of it was sensitivity. It was pattern recognition I kept dismissing. The thing about building $19 million one property at a time is that it requires a very specific kind of thinking. You have to be honest about what something is actually worth, not what you wish it were worth, not what someone tells you it is worth. You have to read the numbers clearly and make decisions based on what is true rather than what is comfortable. I had applied that discipline to every duplex and commercial lease and contractor negotiation for 29 years. I had not applied it to my own family. That was the gap. When I finally did, when I sat at that table in Leslieville and laid out the folders and said what was true without softening it, something shifted. Not immediately, not neatly. But it shifted because the truth had been brought into the room and it couldn't be managed or minimized anymore. My son had enough decency in him to sit with it. That decency was always there. It had just been buried under years of being told that where he came from was something to move past. What I want you to take from this, if you stayed with me this long, is something I learned more from 29 years of early mornings and careful decisions than from any single moment. Character is not what you claim. It's what you do when no one you're trying to impress is watching. My son called me for advice when he was stuck, not because he knew I owned the building, but because some part of him still trusted his mother's judgment. That trust was the seed of everything that came after. And Pauline, who had grown up learning to sort people by the size of their visible assets, had enough honesty in her, eventually, to say out loud that she had learned the wrong lesson. That took something real. I respected it. The quilt is on the change table now. My granddaughter sleeps near it. She doesn't know yet that the woman who made it built something that will outlast all of us. Quietly in a 3-bedroom house near Ramsey Lake, one careful decision at a time. When she's old enough to ask, I'll tell her, not to impress her, to show her what's possible when you refuse to let anyone else set the price on your time.